pleasure and a privilege to welcome a man who knows a thing or two about the balance sheet, the markets, and all of those beautiful things. He's a property investor. Nhlakanipho Ntombela. Putamkulu, good morning this morning. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. How about you?
I'm good, thank you. Good.
Was it easy to kick them blankets this morning, sir?
Yeah, it's getting harder and harder as the weeks go by, but yeah, really good.
Nice to have you on the show. But Nhlakanipho, hey, you know, a lot of us would love to believe that we understand this investment game, but sometimes we really don't. And choosing where to put our money and how to put it in whatever product which we prefer also is a bit of a problem. When it comes to property, you know, you're moving out of home, you've secured a good job, you're saving enough money, and you're going to start out. Some people would say buy your first property should be an investment. Some will say, I need a stable home. Maybe when things are going well and I've saved a bit of money, then I can buy a property investment. Can you put us straight there, Nhlakanipho?
Yeah, so the first distinction that I'm glad that you've made is buying a home and buying an investment is not the same thing. The thought process is not the same. And typically what I've noticed is some people make the mistake of thinking that, no, I'll just buy a home and when I don't want to live there anymore, I'll just rent it out. But that's not, unfortunately, how it works. Because when you're making an investment decision, it purely should be financial. It should be, will this make me money? You know? And when you buy yourself a home, this is where you see yourself living, and it's more of an emotional decision to say that I like this, I like that. As soon as you start putting the word like and love into a property, then it is an emotional decision. So that first distinction needs to be made, right? And then as to whether you should buy yourself an investment or whether you should buy yourself a home, I think it will always depend on the individual. My personal opinion is that you should purchase an investment property first, especially if you are in your scenario. If you are young and you just got into the workplace, you can afford to live at home for a few years. You can afford to rent and share with a friend for a few years while you have your investment property. Because what that's going to do is it's going to get your foot in the door. And property, as you know, is a long-term investment, which means the earlier you start, the better off you'll be in 15, 20 years' time.
Sure, because obviously this speaks to relationships as well. If I'm going to buy my first investment property straight out of varsity, I've got to behave at home so that my folks will be happy to have me for long.
Of course. Of course. The willingness of your folks as well, I guess, is something that will come into play, which is why if you are 23, 24, 25, 26, like renting and sharing with a friend is not a bad thing. You know, you can find yourself a 2-bedroom that you can share with a friend. If you really want to be alone, you can find yourself a bachelor apartment that you can rent for 2-3 years. That rental that you're paying, some people see it as a waste, and I don't see it as a waste, because on the flip side, you have a property that someone else is paying off that hopefully is increasing in value over time. And the cost of that is basically you being able to rent and move around as freely as you want, which is a benefit of renting. You're not really tied down to one place, and you can still save money if you do decide to share with someone, let's say.
This is where some of us cross wires, because the idea that you are renting and you're wasting money pushes people to buying when they're not really ready, or financially they're not that stable.
Yeah, that is unfortunate, because purchasing a property really is, you need to understand all the costs that are involved firstly before you purchase, because there are upfront fees that need to be paid to lawyers, and then also owning the home itself will have a financial implication as well. So if you haven't done your research and you don't really understand the type of investment that you're going into, you can find yourself thinking that you purchased this beautiful asset that everyone congratulated you when you got. However, when you go to bed and you lay in bed alone, you realize the financial strain that you're under because of that asset. So that's why I specifically make that distinction to say an investment should be purely a financial decision. Will this make me money? And a home that you purchase, that will be more of an emotional decision. And not everyone is ready for that emotional decision, which is why I would always say go for the investment first, because that is purely based on facts. And the home that you purchase will be based on emotions and certain things, as we know, in human beings naturally, will be covered by the fact, like, we're just not going to be able to see because we'll be clouded by emotion.
Yeah. So obviously, if, as you suggest, that property investment first, one can just watch the market in time for that emotional decision.
Well, timing the market also, I wouldn't say you should time it, but once you've purchased an investment property, that decision is something you would have made based on facts and numbers, right? So it gets you to understand what it's like to be a homeowner. And then when it's time for you to purchase your own home, you already understand all the cost implications, and you understand what, if you're let's say in a complex or an estate, you understand how levies work, because that's a cost that people tend to neglect, and it can be a cost that can, I've seen it in some situations, be close to the bond amount, just the levies, right? So once you've become a property investor and you've understood it from an investing point of view, you'll be able to use the tools from your investing to purchase your home, which you can then actually reap the benefits in terms of enjoying living in a home and not thinking, what a burden.
True that. So somebody wants to know if one can add the costs involved with buying a house to their bond.
Yes, so that you can do. So it will depend on your credit score. So if you do have a good credit score, that some banks will be willing to allow you to capitalize the bond cost onto the loan, which will then be 105%, which will then be a 105% bond that they've given you, and not just 100%. Some banks are not willing to do that for their clients. That may be due to your credit score. So that's another thing that will really assist you. If you do have a good credit score, it will assist you in getting 100%, and then even further than that, potentially getting 105%, where you capitalize those costs onto the loan.
Can you ask for extra?
Well, now you're really, really pushing it. If you're asking for extra, you would, from what I've seen, usually people who ask for extra and get it would be people who are private clients that are banking with banks, or if they really do have an amazing credit history. And yeah, so that's just from what I've seen, private clients and people with really, really, really exceptional credit scores.
Would you advise someone to do that, though?
Well, I would not, because at the end of the day, the cost might be 30,000 rands, let's say, and that 30,000 rands spread over 20 years, you'll end up paying 80,000 rand, because that's how it works. So you just 30,000 rand, I would say just save up for it, rather than capitalizing it onto your loan, because the repayment on it will include interest, and that interest portion will be even bigger than the amount that you actually borrowed, just the interest alone. Then you still have to pay back the actual amount that you borrowed. So if you're in a tight spot and you really want this place, or you really want this investment, go for it, but recognize that there is a financial implication to capitalizing that amount onto your loan over 20 years.
Yeah, enough to make my heart skip a bit here.
That's how it is, man. That's how it is. That's how it is.
You were talking about percentages, Nhlakanipho. There's this thing called the 2% rule. What is that?
So the 2% rule Some people also know it as the 1% rule. It depends on the type of investor that is investing. It basically says that if you're purchasing a property for, let's say, 500,000 rands, you should be able to get rentals of at least 2%. At least 2% of that property purchase price you should be able to get in the form of rentals. So 500,000 rand at 2% is 10,000 rand. So if you're purchasing a property for 500,000, you should at least be able to get 10,000 rand from that property per month.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Vice versa, I guess, with the 1% rule, where it would just be 5,000 rand, which is 1% of the purchase price of the property.
So then it stands to reason that you really need to do your homework and make sure that for first things first, the rental is guaranteed. You have a reliable client who will not, run circles around you, but will consistently, make payments.
Yes, definitely. You need to make sure that you find yourself a quality tenant. Finding a quality tenant is not easy, but it is doable. And I always say I'd rather have no tenant than have a bad tenant.
Run that by me again?
I would rather have no tenant than have a bad tenant. Because when I have no tenant, then I know that the costs of this property are borne by me. However, if I have a bad tenant, that tenant potentially is not paying rent and I'm unable to get them out. So you now have a tenant living in the property and you're unable to get them out because legally you can't just drag someone out. There's an eviction process that needs to be followed, which costs money that you have to pay. That tenant might damage the property, and those damages will be borne by you again. So I would rather have no tenant in my property than have someone who is a bad tenant.
Yeah, I suppose then it speaks to the kind of agreement that you enter into from the onset.
Yeah, definitely. Those lease agreements are very important. But at the end of the day, when we do have a tenant who is not paying rent, as much as the lease agreement binds them, you do have to follow the eviction process, which can take 3 to 6 months. And in those 3 to 6 months, anything can happen to your property. It can be damaged. The lost rentals that you could put in, the lost rentals that you'll be incurring will be like really, really painful to borne those costs by yourself. So really making sure your due diligence is done on every tenant that you have is really important.
9 minutes to 5 at SaFM. Nhlakanipho Ntombela, property investor, and of course giving us the kind of information that many of us need to have at our fingertips every day as, life changes and life happens. We need to make these very hard decisions, these difficult but important decisions. Nhlakanipho, one of the people that you can talk to so that you really understand what you're getting yourself into. We talk more in a moment. Stay with us.
3 to 5, Sound Awake on SaFM.
Nhlakanipho is with us on SaFM, talking property investing and all matters investment and money making. Nhlakanipho, is it possible for me to rent out my house without telling my mortgage lender?
Well, yeah. So when the bank gives you a loan, a home loan, they're having the assumption that you're going to be living in it, right? From personal experience, I did notify, after I was living in the property myself, I did notify my banker that I do have someone that is living with me who pays me rentals, and it was not an issue. Other banks maybe might have different clauses on the home loan that is attached to you. But in personal experience, it's never been an issue, and I know of a few people who've actually done the exact same thing.
It looks like that's a safer option to take.
Yeah, definitely. Honesty, at the end of the day, will always keep you in line. Because if you try to do things by yourself, if you try to do things behind people's back, it might come back to haunt you in the future, and you wouldn't want that. You wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of the bank, specifically considering that they've given you this money so that you can purchase this property, and you violating their procedures then might put you in a bad space with them, and that's not where you want to be.
What is the state of play in terms of how much money I need to get to buy a house? Can I buy it cash? If not, how much do I need to be able to stick within the 20-year period, which is like forever?
So how much money you need to buy a property, what you need to consider is that there will be transfer costs on the property that will be paid to the attorneys that are transferring the property. If you have a bond attached to the property, you're going to need those bond registration costs. If the property is over R1 million, then you're going to need transfer duty as well. These are some of the costs that can be capitalized onto your loan. However, usually these are upfront costs, assuming that you're getting a 100% loan from the bank, right? And then obviously afterwards you'll need costs to maintain the property, maintaining it in terms of paints, maintaining the roof, and any damages and repairs that might happen and occur over time. Those costs will be, those costs really will differ depending on the size of the property, depending on the location of the property as well.
What's the difference between buying in a new development versus buying an existing house?
Yeah, new developments have that benefit of not paying transfer duty and transfer costs. So the developers, there's a lot of legal side to it and tax to it, but basically in essence, when you are purchasing into a new development, typically you're not going to be paying those costs. If you are buying a standalone house or an apartment in a complex or something like that has already been occupied by someone else, those are costs that you are going to incur. So those are the main two differences that you see with purchasing in a new development versus purchasing a property that's been owned by someone else. And then obviously the new development is brand new, typically has great finishes by the developers. They understand what consumers want, they understand what their clients want and need, and everything will be there. And if you are buying a standalone house or something like that, then there might be a few damages here and there, things you need to fix up. But then on the flip side, you're able to also negotiate a lower price for those damages so that to account for them in the purchase price. And with new developments, there's usually no room for negotiation. If the developer says this property is R1 million, you can't now negotiate and try get a deal for 850. But with the property that is being sold by someone who previously owned it, there is room for negotiation because it has been occupied by someone and they have a motivation to sell.